What's up, guys? Welcome back to F4A. On this episode, I have a random subject for you. For those of you who, like me, grew up watching this TV show called Jackie Chan Adventures, I loved this series when I was a kid. I loved it. I watched it all the time. I woke up on Saturday mornings, looked forward to it, like watching after school and everything. And just like any kid, I wish I had the Talismans, which for those of you who didn't watch the series, these talismans are like these little special pieces of rock. They're magical. Each one of them has one of the creatures from the Chinese zodiac, and each one of them had its own individual power. It's kind of crazy the way it worked. And each one of them had its ups and its downs. Combined, they had their own, they worked crazy well together. But on this episode, I want to know if you could only have one of these talismans, which one would you pick? So we'll start with the rooster. The rooster, it has the powers of levitation and telekinesis. You can make yourself float and make other things float too. Very, very useful to, like, let's say people who work in construction. You can make objects float and make it weightless. Insanely helpful. Same thing if you want to levitate yourself, very useful. However, downside is you can only really focus on a handful of things at once, and if you lose concentration, then things just drop. So if you have something really high, it drops and you lose concentration. In the same situation, if you are floating yourself, you can't really control how fast you go. You can control the direction and everything, but you're more levitating, as it were, rather than flying. Next, we have the ox. The ox talisman gives you the super strength of a whole group of oxen. It gives you, you can basically be as strong as the Hulk. Flick something and then it'll break a hole in it. Downside of this is you don't know how strong you are until you've actually tested it, and since super strength is not a very common thing, you can end up breaking things, such as if you give somebody a hug, inadvertently you can break every single bone in their body and kill them. That's kind of a downside in my opinion. But super strength. Next, we have the snake talisman. The snake talisman, power of invisibility. Very, very useful, but practical use, you're only invisible. Now, unless you're an actual spy or something like that, or a pervert, then invisibility, while cool, doesn't have a lot of practical uses, like I said, unless you're a thief or a spy or, like I said, a pervert. But it's more of an opinion. Next, we have the dragon talisman. The dragon talisman is basically just, you can, a giant ball of fire blast, basically dragon's breath. You can just put a giant hole in a wall, and it's crazy the way, how powerful this thing is. Downside is, that's kind of its only use. You put, you basically have a missile inside of your hand, and you have to control where it goes, because once you fire it, it's not going to stop. That's kind of the downside to it, though, and the upside to it. But it's whatever you want. Next, we have the rabbit talisman. The rabbit talisman, it's super speed. You can be as fast as a flash. And it's kind of crazy just how fast you can go. Downside is, you're fast, but what happens if you inadvertently hit something? You're still, going that speed. So if you trip, you're going to be, tripping and falling at that speed and hurt yourself. That's kind of the downside to super speed. You got to work on the brakes and control where you're going. Plus, who knows how many bugs you're going to get in your teeth, because while you're moving fast, no one else is going to be able to see you, and neither is anything else. Next, we have the sheep talisman. For the sheep talisman, this one is Astral Projection. Very cool, very useful. It's essentially, for those of you seeing Doctor Strange, it's basically your soul leaves your body, and you can, in the case of the show, you can invade people's dreams. Downside to doing that is that they're fully aware that you're in their dreams. They can talk to you and you can interact and you can still figure out how this person works, but they can still see you. And another downside is when you use this power, your body is up for grabs. It can be moved, it can be harmed. That's the downside to it, though. So unless you're in somewhere safe, sheep talisman, not very useful. Next, we have the rat talisman. The rat talisman, very, very cool power. Pretty much, it brings motion to the motionless. So if you have, let's say a toy of Superman, and you give him the rat talisman, that toy will basically turn into Superman, and it'll have his personality and act like Superman. Downside is, though, it doesn't this little thing you bring back to life, it doesn't adhere to your like commands. If you say come here, unless it actually like will obey you, which I doubt, that's the downside to it. You're not its master. It basically thinks it's alive and doesn't know that you brought this back through this. Next we have the Horse Talisman. The Horse Talisman is insanely useful, I think, out of most of them. This one, it heals you completely, like just heals everything. If you have a cold, gone. You break an arm, healed. You fall off a ledge, everything gone. No headache, nothing, none of that. Good useful thing is that you can maybe heal others while you're doing this too. Downside is you have to be within proximity of each person or thing that you're healing, and that's kind of the downside to it. So very useful in the medical field, can help a lot of people, but you have to physically be with the person and just, you kind of wouldn't have a life. There's too many sick people. Next we have the Monkey Talisman. This one is a lot more unique than the others because this one you can actually turn other things, other objects or people into creatures. So let's say you say fish, whatever you're like firing at will turn into a fish, an actual like live fish. In some cases, if it's a person, they still have thoughts, they still have like their consciousness and everything. So if you turn something into a monkey, it'll still like be aware that it is a person, but it'll be acting like a monkey and they can't actually use words. Downside is though, they can still, like, you're still turning things into creatures or animals, and unless you're going to turn it back or something like that, like a human, then pretty much you can't really get a good use out of this, because unless you're carrying the talisman with you the entire time, you're going to stay as that creature. So what happens if you lose it? You kind of lost it and you got to get it back, or else you're going to stay as that creature. Next, we have the Dog Talisman. This one grants immortality. This one, amazing abilities, very cool, and pretty much you can have a 60-year-old like person be as healthy as they were when they were 20. Very, very useful, very unique power. Downside is, if for those of you who have watched Highlander or watched like Immortals live, unless you live with like a purpose or something like that, it will keep you immortal, but that's the downside in a way to it. No one else is immortal with you, just you. And you have to keep it on you at all times. So it works like the Horse Talisman, but doesn't heal you in a way, but it keeps you from being harmed as a sort. Next one, we have the Pig Talisman. This one, just in a way, it's just like the Dragon Talisman. This one specifically, it's Heat Beam Eye Blast. Basically, you can do heat vision just like Superman. Very cool, very useful, but you have to be aiming specifically on where you're looking and everything. And yes, you can control it, but you have to be able to like aim where you're working, where you're looking at. But practical use, what are you going to do with this? Very cool, but what are you going to do with it? Exactly. Last, we have the Tiger Talisman. This one, it's a Spirital Balance Talisman. This one's very unique because it can turn you into two different people, like split your personalities, you're both your good and bad, and very useful. However, you essentially need to become one person, and again, you need to keep both of them to combine, that way you can be one person again. It's useful, but it also too has its downside, because what happens if your bad side doesn't want to go back with your good, or something like that, or what happens if when something happens to one side of you and it doesn't happen to both? You don't know, but this one's all about spiritual balance. I don't find a good practical use for it other than being in two places at once, but you don't know how good or bad you are unless you actually know that. But me personally, I think I would take the Horse Talisman. That just because I would want to help people, I'd want to help myself and everything. Downside is though, I'd be healthy, but I won't be immortal like the dog. But that's my choice. Let me know what you guys think down below. Comment down below. I want to know your opinions. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. See ya.